Designing Game Devs. Tony Chan here, and welcome to episode 57 of Game Dev Loadout, where I chat with the best people in our industry 7 days a week. We will learn how they got started, the obstacles they face, and the tools they use for success. And now let's chat with today's future guest, Geoffrey Engelstein. Geoffrey, it is game time. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So he is the award-winning tabletop game designer whose titles include the Ares Project, Space Cadets, and the Dragon and Flagon. He is also a noted podcaster contributing to the Dice Tower and GameTek, and he hosts Ludology, a weekly podcast on game design. So Geoff, go ahead and give us a bit about your personal life and how you got started.
Well, I've always been a gamer. I did most of my gaming back in the 70s, back when D&D first came out, and we were playing games like Diplomacy and Cosmic Encounter and stuff like that. So games have always been a part of my life, and always enjoyed playing them. And then I started getting a little bit more into started with the podcasting and looking deeper into games and what made them tick. And I've always been kind of a math and science guy, so doing that type of analysis on systems, and a game is really a collection of interacting elements that create a system, kind of got me interested in the design side. And so eventually I just figured I'd jump in and start designing on my own. I got the Ares Project was my first published game, which I did with my son, and it was inspired by StarCraft, and was really my attempt to take StarCraft, which was I was a big fan of, still am, and turn that into a tabletop gaming experience.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, StarCraft is a huge popular game, especially in Korea. Are you like advertising or marketing to Korea, since your game is kind of influenced by StarCraft?
Well, I think it's out of print at this point. This was back around like 2010, 2011. So it's a little bit hard to find copies now, but maybe someday I'll go back and revisit that.
All right. So your expertise in designing board game, what is something we probably don't know about when designing a board game that we should?
Well, for me, one of the things that I try to explain to my students, and I teach a game design class at NYU on tabletop game design, is that one of the things about tabletop games versus video games and other things is I think that's most important, is that tabletop games are really more about the social interaction between the players. It's video games very often are kind of solo experiences, even if you're in a group or something. It's some games give you the group dynamics, but it's nothing quite the same as sitting around a table with a bunch of friends or family and playing a tabletop game. And so, I counsel tabletop designers to focus on the experience that they want the players to have. Not worry about the mechanics first, not worry about even the theme really, but think about kind of the emotional experience and the way they want the players to interact with each other. Do they want them to be, laughing and just joking it up? Do they want them to be suspicious of each other? Do they want them to, be really intense and, be in a battle of wits? How do you want, what kind of stories do you want your players to be telling after they leave the table? And that, I think, more than, a theme, is going to really guide you through the jungle of game design, because there's so many different directions that a design can take you, that it's important to have a guiding light to kind of go for you. And I personally, I go with experience and emotion as my guideposts.
Ooh, focus on experience and emotion. So let me ask you this. Is there like a good way to transition or convert like a video game into a board game, like how Dark Souls did it?
Yeah, that's been popular. There's been a lot of video games that have come over into the board game world. And I think the key thing is you're never going to be able to totally replicate the same experience. There's other things that video games can do that just become totally tedious to calculate. The hit points of 350 different zombies or something that's so easy for a computer to keep track of, but is going to be tough in a board game. So you have to, again, you got to look at the video game, and you've got to say, what's the core experience here that the players are getting? What can I really focus on? And, like in the Dark Souls game, they focused on the boss combat and sort of the combos and learning the specific moves that a boss can do and how to interact with it. So that was the element that they sort of extracted. And sometimes if you're taking a video game into a different universe, you'll even go with going completely sideways. I talked about doing the game Ares project in response to StarCraft, and one of that was that one of the reasons I did that is I did it right after playing the actual official StarCraft board game, which was done by Fantasy Flight Games, now sadly out of print because it's a really good game, but it doesn't replicate it's set in the StarCraft universe, but Blizzard specifically told Fantasy Flight when they're designing that game, they said, look, we don't want we don't just want a tabletop version of StarCraft. We want something that's evocative, that has the same units and the same ideas, but so in that case, they did planet-to-planet combat, so it's a different thing. And recently, when Riot Games did Mechs versus Minions, they set in the League of Legends universe, but it's not a MOBA game. It's not trying to be League of Legends on a tabletop. They took a step sideways and said, okay, let's take the characters that people love and some of the other elements that are true for players, but not actually try to compete with the video game itself. So there's different ways you can approach it.
Yeah, I like that. So you don't have to essentially convert the game. You could do a side story of the game, of the character or the story, and create a different element to it with the board game. Yeah. Now, overall, what are key principles for a fun board game?
That's a really difficult question. People have been wrestling that. Again, it goes back to your experience, but I think that some things that in general that people have been getting better at, or at least now have been trending towards, is games that are simpler to pick up, perhaps not simple in play, but at least when you sit down at the table, it's you don't have to wrestle with the rules as much. So, for example, one of the big advantages that video games have over tabletop games is that you don't need a rule book. When I was playing video games back in the day, even StarCraft, came with a 300-page manual that you used to read. But now, video game designers have gotten really, really good at doing tutorials and easing people into play and teaching them what they need to know in the process. And that's one of the things that has really contributed to the growth of video games, that you can just jump right into it and start having a positive experience. And board games have started to take that same tactic. So they become sort of like an onion sort of experience where maybe there's the initial rules are very simple, and maybe they stay the same for the first two turns, okay? And then things start to escalate a little bit from there. Rules are introduced gradually. And sometimes not even in the same game. You play one game and then you play another game where there's more rules that are introduced, and another game where there are more rules that are introduced. That was, again, the technique that Riot used in Mechs versus Minions. So I think it's people don't have the patience now that they used to. Back in the 80s, in the days of the big complex war games and things like that, people would play a game 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times to understand it and to start to have fun with it. But now that there's so many tabletop games out and so many video games out, there were close to 5,000 board games released in 2016. Wow. That if on the very first play people aren't having a good time, they're not going to stick around to find the fun that maybe they're on the 3rd or 4th place. You need to put the fun right in the beginning. But again, what is the fun goes back to the earlier point about the emotion. Is you've got to evoke that emotion and get players really. I think fun comes from engagement. If players are engaged in the game, either interacting with each other or interacting with the story of the game, that's what's gonna bring out those fun moments.
I think what you just say is absolutely on point, because I remember my brother, he tried to make me play a tabletop game. I don't remember what it was, but because it was just too complicated with all these different rules, I just went back to play video games. So yep. I definitely see what you mean. The simpler or more accessible it is, the better. Now, let's take this on a more personal level. You've been developing these type of games for a long time now. What was the worst moment of your career? That one moment that's still vivid in your mind? Be very detailed and tell us that personal story.
Very detailed, huh?
Yes, detailed.
It's probably, the one that I always kind of cringe at when I think about it was actually the very first board game that I pitched. Was actually before what ultimately became the Ares project. I had dabbled with some other designs before that. And I had one that actually was sort of a bit of an adaptation from a video game. And I was pretty excited about it and had developed it and, finally was able to get an appointment with a meeting with a publisher to play test the game. And I went in with really high hopes, but, I hadn't fully finished the game. I figured that my perception was that you would go to the publisher with something that was kind of maybe close to finished, or at least got the idea across, and then they would work with you to sort of develop it and go from there. And I sat down with this publisher and we played the game, and it just went completely off the rails. It didn't work at all. And he sat through the whole thing, and did it, but it was just very, very embarrassing for me. And I learned that the publishers will not. I figured that he would just see the genius in the idea that I was presenting before him, and just recognize the shining jewel that was there, and learned that you really need to be much, much better prepared when you're sitting in front of a publisher. Things really, it needs to be close, if not basically at the point where you think it's just absolutely ready to be published now and ready to be finished now. And same thing with like video games. If you can't start giving stuff to people that's filled with bugs and crashing and this and that, they're not going to have the patience to get through that, to see the vision that you have. You have to make sure it's as clean as possible.
I mean, like, how did you know things were going bad?
Just it was about the concept of the game is that you were building up cities, and then at the end of the game there was a giant horde of creatures that stormed onto the map and wiped out, basically knocked everybody's stuff down, and you wanted to have the most stuff left after the horde, so you could like make your opponent's cities more attractive to the barbarians when they attacked, put giant stacks of gold on the walls and things like that, so the barbarians would be attracted in that direction. And as they were rampaging, you could try to steer them in different ways. But the balance was all off, so that the barbarians were way too powerful, and they leveled every single city on the entire board, was completely destroyed, and we all ended the game with 0 points. So not a fun experience, not where you want to leave your playtest.
Yeah, key point is just to not assume that your idea is gonna be accepted, across the publisher or the user. So it's good to play test it for sure. Yep. And now that you're more experienced and better, what do you think was like the best investment you've made? And it could be investment of money, time, or energy. And how did you decide to make that investment?
That's an interesting question. I think the best investment of time that I make is, this is perhaps a more general answer to your question than you're looking for, but I read a lot of rules. I read many, many more rule books than games that I get to play. So I find that by I hear that some designers I know of that like to kind of keep themselves cloistered, and they don't explore seeing what else is out there, and they're worried that they're going to be like polluted by looking at other games and inadvertently steal ideas from other games and stuff like that. I voraciously look at all the other games that are coming out, as many as I can. I don't have enough time to play them all, but I do make sure to invest the time to read the rules and just say, oh yeah, that's a clever idea, and you file it away. And the next time you run into a problem, you have this whole little library in the back of your head about different possibilities, because, game design's about problem solving. It's like engineering in a way. It's kind of a halfway between art and engineering. You have to try to figure out ways to, make it fun for the player, like you talked about, make things simple and, bring that experience forth. But at the same time, even more so than video games, board games are bound by the fact that it's something physical that has to be made. It has to fit onto a table. The players have to manipulate the stuff. You're not there to explain the rules the way a video game is there to keep the players from breaking rules. So it has to be easier to get going. So that side of it is more of an engineering and a science of the graphic design and the layout and just the cost of the individual components. But you still need the art. So it's nice to kind of have that whole library of techniques to fall back on.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to know what like the competition is doing, to understand how they're doing it, what they're doing, and what works and what don't work. Like, what's a great game to use like as a blueprint before someone like try to create a board game?
It really depends on what you're looking to do. It's impossible to answer that in a vacuum. But I mean, certainly a good place to start is to go on to BoardGameGeek.com, which is the big board game website, and they have like their list of the ratings of the top 100 games of all of the users vote on, and it's sort of a little bit selective because people that are on that site like a particular style of game, but it's tens of thousands of people that have voted on these things. So if you do those the top 10 to 20 or even 100 games if you can that are on that list, that's going to give you a really great crash course in modern quality game design.
Awesome. I would definitely link that up. Game devs, the show isn't over yet. Now we have reached a crunch time, the phase that is dreaded, but we are here to overcome it. Geoffrey, basically, I would ask you quick questions and you'd be giving us a ton of valuable information in return. Are you ready to crush it and release the show?
I am ready.
Yes. What's a personal habit that contributes to your success?
I doodle a lot.
Oh, I like that.
I'm just going off the top of my head. I'm not thinking it through here. So that's the first thing that came to mind.
I read and believe doodling is a great habit to have. You just write your ideas out there like that.
Yep.
What was originally holding you back from joining the game industry?
Probably fear. Just, fear that I wasn't going to be able to do something that was going to be worthy of putting out there.
How has a failure set you up for a later success?
Well, like I said, every failure you learn a lesson. So like that playtesting failure that I had, I now am much, much better at pitching. That taught me one major pitfall to avoid when going out there and doing that.
And that is really good to know your elevator pitch for your game. So when someone asks about it, you're ready to tell it.
Yep. It should be like, no more than like 2 or 3 sentences. You need to catch people's attention really fast.
Definitely. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I've gotten so many over the years. I guess the best one is just to take chances, be fearless, just forge ahead with your vision. So I try not to look back or worry too much about it. Just go with your gut.
Yes, just to get started. What resources would you recommend we use? Particularly to create board games, aside from the boardgeek.com?
Boardgamegeek.com. It's a great resource. Yeah. We've had some great guests on my podcast, Ludology, which you can find at ludology.net. There's a series of conventions called Unpub, which are around the country, which are for kind of game designers to get together and bring their unpublished games and play against each other. Just test some. You get people to test your game, and you'll test other people's games and exchange ideas. And just in general, board game conventions, if you go to things like Gen Con or the new PAX Unplugged, which is going to be in Philadelphia, a lot of game designers come to those and, bring prototypes and, have meetups and trade ideas.
And now this next question is a bit of a doozy, so take your time if you need to.
Okay.
Imagine you woke up the next morning in a brand new world and you knew no one. You still have all the experience and knowledge you currently have today. Your food and shelter is taken care of and you have a laptop. What would you do step by step on the path to become a great game designer?
Well, I already have all my knowledge, right? So I guess I'm already set to be a game designer. I mean, the first step in these journeys is to just sit down and do it and try it. So many people that think that there's like this magical barrier that's separating, the published game designers and people in the game design industry versus people that are outside the industry. And it's, but the reality is just, you just sit down and you do it. And maybe you have to do it in a way that doesn't earn any money for a while. But if you just sit and you craft games, things that you like to do, and show them to people and not get discouraged because your first games are going to be absolutely terrible. Even when you know what you're doing, you can kind of overcome some of the major pitfalls, but it's, you're still going to run into some problems. You just need to do it, throw it away and then do it again. And, ultimately you'll get that. So yeah, I mean, if I was in a new world and, I had my laptop, I would need to make some paper. So I would probably have to grab some trees and just smush them up and spread them out to try to make some paper. But just get to designing. There's no magical answer other than just doing it.
Yes, it's really that simple. It's just to get started and start doing something and, don't overthink it. Just get started. You're so on point. We have reached the end. Go ahead and give us a parting piece of guidance and how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
So you can reach me on Twitter. I'm at G Engelstein. That's GENGELSTEIN. Or you can reach me over at ludology.net. That's got all my contact information over there as well as links to the podcast.
Make sure to check him out. Game Does. His podcast is something you really want to look into if you want to be a game designer for a board game. And what's a parting piece of guidance you want to leave with us?
First time you design a game, it's going to be too complicated. Simplify, 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 simplify. Things are always more complicated than you think they are when you put them in front of a player.
Simplify your games. I love it. Geoffrey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And for that, we are truly grateful. And we will catch you next time.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Game Does, for listening, and remember that knowledge is only potential power. Execution is the game. I am so excited to announce our first sponsored giveaway with Game Dev Underground, where a winner can get a free 1-hour consultation with the founder, Tim Rusbeck. So if you have any questions on building and launching your game, get on this giveaway ASAP. This is a $1,000 value, and it can be yours. All you have to do is go to the show notes page at GameDevLoadout.com and sign up for my email list. That's it. So until then, keep on making great games, and I will catch you on the next episode. Bye.